Okay, welcome back. Cara, who's next to you? We got a black marker. Make sure everybody has a black marker. We have it right there and use it as a black marker on everyone. Set. So, let me just put some things on the board here. This is on NT7, right? Notes? Okay, so today is Monday, February 19, 2018. So what we'll be doing is we'll be talking about databases. We'll be talking about data. Under databases, we'll be talking about databases, data warehouses, we'll be talking about relational, and I'm going to use the acronym DB for databases. We'll be talking about distributed databases, and then we'll be talking about blockchain, and its relationship to data, and how is that different, how it stores in blockchain versus the relational and the distributed. Okay? We're supposed to have two guest speakers coming in tonight. One is lives in New York, and will be joining us tonight. And he has a new company that does what he calls nation pay, basically banking on blockchain. He set up this new company, and he'll be introducing, and then I have two more, and another person that will be coming in, and they will be they're starting to think about it. He's a pharmacist, and he's thinking about doing it in healthcare. So if you see somebody peeking in, Andrea, you're right there. If you see somebody coming in and peeking in, just have them come in. Okay? We scheduled just for your assignments. I'll make an assignment tonight, and I'll do that in the beginning of class. And I also mentioned to you, I'm going to do a review next week for the exam. We'll spend the time. So one of the things that I want you to do is review the material. If you have additional questions in some of the materials, I'll go into it. Some of the others ones, I'll tell you, you don't need that for the test for this week. And also, we'll go over it in detail of what the test will be like. Because one of the things I want is everybody to be prepared for it, and we can get the majority of concepts down, and then we can start doing our projects. And between now and next week, I'd like you to think about the projects. And when you ask, well, what should my project be? I'm thinking about this as like a demo lab. I want you to think about your project as a demo. You can take any part of technology that we're covering and do your demo. You can demonstrate it, you can do research about it. For instance, some of you want to do blockchain maybe in finance or in advertising. Others want to demonstrate some other ideas. So I'd like you to think about something that your group has passion about and wants to learn more about. Rather than, and I'm going to be working with each of your groups, I'm a member of each of your groups. So you can think of me as an additional person in your group, and we'll decide together, we'll write up a contract, we'll decide together what makes sense among your groups, and what we'll do is we'll present it, we'll record it in some ways, we'll create it where I can even see a way in which we can do this demo lab where we can set this up at this institution, and we can have demo labs throughout the world. And one of the things here is a lot of times you see demos, and a lot of times it's by vendors or it's biased, so we're going to have a much more objective way to do it. So at the end of the class, we'll end a bit early. Some of you can discuss with me, and I'll discuss with a couple of the groups where we want to go for it. So you can start thinking about, we've discussed a number of issues here and what we want to do here on our project. Okay? So let me start by, I have on, this should be here. Let me go and do our broadcast. So the first thing I want to do is, let's see. Okay, hold on. Let me just go back. To Creator Studio. I want to go to live streaming, events, and in events I have here at 6:30, so I want to start my Hangouts on air. And I'm waiting here for my Hangouts on air. Any questions before we begin? While we're setting this up, I also want to go to
We're
assignment.
webcamming the speaker?
What?
What's happening here? Sorry.
What?
What's happening?
What's happening? I'm trying to try myself to start broadcasting.
Oh.
Okay? So we're going to broadcast here. So we're broadcasting myself right now. Oh, you think a speaker's coming in? We could do that as well. So one of the things is we could participate, and this is what, you see this URL right here? This long one, I can copy this. And you remember I also said, let me just go to courses. Let me log into courses. Courses, miami.edu, right? Log in with my ID. Sign in. Right? And when I sign in, I should have, I'm in KX, right? I'm in the regular KX section. And in my regular KX section, if I go to course documents, and I go to live streams, right? All I need to do, I don't have this, let me just even do this. Remember last time I talked about Steemit? Anybody remember that? Steemit.com? Did I talk about it? No, yes? What do you remember, Blake?
It was essentially like blockchain for content creators.
Yeah, it's a blockchain for content creators, and what I created was my own, you can think about it as my own channel of @the Psycho. And in this case, if I go to @the Psycho, this first one at 6:30, let me click in here, right? And this is my short, this is my broadcast, and let me just add it here. Let me put in the long one so we can have a other person come in. And then let me update my post. And we should be able, if I go there, should I see it? Yes, so I'm seeing my posting already. You see, so you can view, so basically you can go to the Steemit. See? So you could just go to steemit.com @the Psycho every time, and the one on the top at our time period is what I'm streaming. Everybody get that? So that was what we were doing. And then I'm going to go to my courses, and if I go to assignments, we should have quiz 1, the hardware, security chapter 4, the data, the tech guide 2, which is the 2A software. And I'm going to make one more available for next week, and that's Tech 3, the cloud. So I'm going to edit the test options. And what should I do? Is what? Open the test and make available. And I'll give, in here, I give 2 attempts. And I submit. So you should see it at your end. Do you? You'll find out.
Yeah, Tech 3 Cloud.
Okay, Tech 3 Cloud. So it's TG, so it's Tech Guide for the cloud. We'll be talking about the cloud and the differences. If I go to course documents, I can go to my PowerPoint, and you can see here I have my data. And in my PowerPoint, I have open. That should come about. What else do I need? And then we go to my vital source. sign in. I have all my sign-ins here. Right. And notice I have my sign-ins. I'm going to go to my bookshelf, and I should see our book as well for chapter 5, hopefully. And this is about our data. So this is in the area of data and knowledge of data. So let's look at something here. Do we lack data? We don't lack data. Like, data's everywhere. Where can we get data? You can even see when we were doing the automated trading systems, when we were doing NinjaTrader, where do we get our data? Online, right? We can be hooked. We can go into Yahoo Finance. We can get real-time data. I can get end-of-day data. I get data all the time. Who doesn't have a name tag? No, a name tag. Let's go. Get up. Okay, so we have data all the time. What's the problem in the data is organizing the data. What's the problem when we have data? We had, what, the Chief Information Security Officer last week here. And what was the problem? You can see that the data gets, what, hacked. The data is vulnerable. It's exploited. So one of the things is that we have to basically figure out what data do we need to collect, who owns that data, and what are we going to use that data for? There's something called data governance. Data governance. And what the heck does that mean, and who cares? Who can help me? Coleman, you got an idea?
I don't know.
What do you think, William?
It's kind of like monitoring data over like a organization or organization.
What?
Monitoring data over an entire organization.
Yeah, monitoring data, but what is it? It's basically, what do you want to govern? Right? Do you want to govern? You heard of a government? What's the whole purpose of a government? The whole purpose of the government is to organize, is to oversee. So one of the things that we have, think about something simple like Equifax. Anybody hear about Equifax? Coleman, did you hear about Equifax? Type it in. Equifax, and then you'll tell me, right? You think you're just going to be relaxing here, Coleman? You know you're going to have to work, right? Equifax hacking, or Equifax. EQ, what do you got? What's anybody got? Lexi, what do we got? Equifax. Brian, what are we sitting here for?
It's a credit report.
It's a credit report, and what happened, Griffin? You want to take a marker too, Griff?
Oh, yeah. 143 million Americans with fax accounts got hacked.
Okay, 143 million, few numbers, huh? Got hacked. And what happened? Have you heard about it? Blake, did you hear about it?
Yeah, it happened.
Okay, and what happened? Why did it get hacked?
Essentially, there was an issue with like their internal data infrastructure, and after the breach occurred, like social security numbers were pulled, and it was an enormous issue.
It's an enormous issue, and why did it happen? You remember, why did it happen? Any ideas? Basically what happened is we talked about it last week. Remember we talked about threats and vulnerabilities. And what's a threat? Some outside agent internally or externally going to cause someone harm, right? That's a threat, right? And what's vulnerability mean? What's a vulnerability mean? Like, what do you think a vulnerability is?
A weakness.
A weakness, right? Where am I vulnerable, right? If you go to my house, right, and if I have large bushes in front of my house, right, I'm more vulnerable maybe for somebody hiding in the bushes, right? Where am I vulnerable? Where am I vulnerable in my computer systems that I'm on the internet? Where am I going to be vulnerable? In this case, what happens is remember we talked about OS? Put it in your notes, OS. Which stands for what? Operating systems then need to be updated. They have vulnerabilities, and there's some way in which they talk about exploits. That the outside world knows that I'm vulnerable, or knows that my system is vulnerable, and they will exploit that. So what happened in Equifax is they had a server which had vulnerabilities. The company knew it had vulnerabilities of the software that sold them the operating system, and they said, we'll do an update. And what happens when they do an update is what do? Is they close the vulnerability. So then what happens here is they knew they had a vulnerability. Consultants came into Equifax and told them, you have a vulnerability, you have to fix it. Everybody with me? Six months after they were told that, in between they got hacked. Okay? They were told the vulnerability, they got hacked, they were publicly traded, and before they told the public, maybe it was a coincidence, but all the board and the major executives sold their stock. And then they told the public. What's the issue of that, you think, Blake?
I mean, it's a violation of trading laws. They're acting on like information that's internal to the
Right, insider. It just so happens, and they're claiming, I had to buy a house. I needed to. My family had to go on a big vacation, right? But it's just a coincidence that somehow what happened here is they had a vulnerability. They were told about that, and guess what? Did they follow through? Just like, remember NinjaTrader, Priscilla? We installed NinjaTrader. We updated in lab, and guess what? What happened the first week? It works now. What happened the first week? It didn't work because I basically governed the data, right? Was told, go ahead and install it. I got a feedback saying we installed it, but what happened in between is no one went down and actually checked, did they install it properly? So they were told by consultants, think about it, they were told by consultants, you have a vulnerability, there's a fix to that vulnerability, and somewhere along the line, what happened? It wasn't done. And this is pretty bad, but you think about even the horrible situation in Parkland, right? What happened when they were announcing, remember the FBI? There was an announcement to the FBI that there's going to be this school shooter, and along the lines of that data, right, it went to the call center, and we don't know what happened. It died in the call center somewhere. And I mean, that's really when we're talking about life and death, that you're talking about that those systems, you can go from something like that versus all the 143 million users, their data was hacked. What can they do with that? And then think about hospitals that are attacked. And then you think about all the areas that are. So in data governance, there has to be a set of who owns the data and to do processes to make sure that the data not only is correct and integrated, but that we are adhering to exploits, we are adhering to updates being done properly. There's someone going ahead and checking it. Just like the FBI, if we're going to think about it, that horrible situation is someone called in, and what happened, It just disappeared that we have it. So you have here the area of data that's so important, you have a way in which to manage data, and master data then is the key data that we have. So what I want to make sure here is if I have all this data, let's even think about data that we know. Let's think about an example of a university. Everybody know a university? So tell me, we'll start with Priscilla, okay? Did such a good job, Priscilla should be rewarded, right? Came back with me with documentation to tell me what, on terms of the data. Tell me your data, what kind of data does a university have on you? It has your first name, right? It has your last name. It has your address. What else does it have?
Phone number.
It has your phone. What else does it have? Your date of birth. What else does it have?
Health insurance,
Okay, it may have some health insurance,
social security,
Social Security,
course history.
all right, and it also has what? It has what other information? And who has this data? Let's even think about this. Who has your data? What parts of the school have your data? Admissions, housing, registrar, who else? Financial aid, who else? I'm gonna need
Your advisor.
advisors, who else? I guess advisors, the School of Business, right? School of Business, School of SOB, I don't mean it that way, right? School of Business, right? What else? Who else has your data? That it? Who's on the team? Anybody on the team?
Compliance.
Compliance, okay. So basically, are you on a team?
Yeah.
What team are you on?
Tennis.
Tennis, okay, you're on a tennis team, so it's sports, right?
My coaches. Yeah.
And then your coaches, right? They have different types of data. What else? Who else? Is the library, right? What else? Now, what data does it have in the housing? It has last, address, phone, date of birth. Do you see any redundant? And what does it have unique here? It has my dorm room, right? My dorm name, right? Or whatever. Has my roommate maybe. Who else? The health center. Now, is there any redundancy in this data? Cole, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's all that demographics, right?
Yeah. That's good stuff.
Right, all that demographics. Now, if I have a file system, I have to create these all the time. And let's say Alex moves. He moves his original address, and then he also moves, let's say he moves from New York, you know, his parents moved somewhere else to California, so this needs to be changed, and then he moves from out off campus to another place, right? So what needs to be changed? And who works? Anybody work on campus? So if you work on campus, do they have information about you? So we have basically what they call workday, right? Workday has information, how much you get an hour, and so forth. We have all that information here, and what's unique? We have part of it. So what happens when Alex moves? Brian, what happens when Alex moves?
Like to another dorm? Like
Let's say he moves to another dorm, he moves addresses.
they have to transfer all the information.
I have an address here, I have an address here, right? I have an address, all these things, they need to be updated. Can there possibly be mistakes
Yeah.
when they update, right? Or we forget one of the databases to update. Anybody ever have those problems, right? Where one database doesn't understand the other database. So what they created from all this is they created what we call a data management system. And what that means is all my data then will go in a centralized place. And then I can have different departments query, write this down, Q-U-E-R-Y, query the database. Yes, Coleman?
What did you mean when you say they made it? Who's they? They made the
Oh.
data management system.
When I have different departments, let's say we think about sports department, okay? And somebody calls me and say, you know what, I want to give a scholarship to a female tennis player who's a major in finance and has a GPA over 3.2 and is a foreign exchange student. So basically, I as a professor would know, but if I could query that system and say, find me all the females that are, let's say, athletes with a GPA greater than 3.0 and are in the business school. Someone else may want to give scholarships. Let me give scholarships to Hispanic females that want to do anything in what they call STEM, science, technology, management. We want to give scholarships. This is called a database management system. It's a way in which I can manage my data and then I can reduce mistakes. What's the problem with this, though? What's its vulnerabilities by having my data stored here versus in individual files? What do you think the weaknesses are, Frankie?
If it's hacked, they get just shade you while there you have multiple different.
Right, so if I want it, it's almost like when I think about my wallet, right, in Bitcoin, right? Did anybody see that, by the way? Now they're taking people hostage that they know they're millionaires in Bitcoin. They're just grabbing these people, taking them hostage and saying, if you don't give me your wallet, your password, we'll kill you or something, we'll take you hostages. So the idea is you want to keep low. You want to tell everybody that you're a multi-billionaire, right? You want to keep that thing. So keep that on the hush-hush for me, right? When I walk out, I'm a billionaire. So one of the things that we want to do is it can also be vulnerable. So what do we want to do is we always want to have backup. Backup is going to be important in database management systems because what? One is I can lose my data. I can roll back my data. Somebody's made some has intruded on my data. I'll be able to know that. A lot of times people are hacked and people don't even know they've been hacked. Yes, Frankie?
You wrote query there. Is that just transferring data to a database management system?
A query is asking a question. A query then will retrieve. Find me all those stocks that have profits per month greater than 5%. So I'm going to get back, a query is then like a question, and I get back the results. One of the more common query languages is called SQL. Structured, what does it stand for, Coleman? Structured SQL.
Structured
And the Q for
question.
or query. And the L stands for, it's a language. What does the L stand for? Language. This is an old language. But it's been around quite a long time, and it's called SQL. A very popular version of this SQL is called MySQL. Look it up. It's called MySQL. What do you get? Brittany, what do you get? Have you heard of it? MySQL, Brittany?
No, I have not.
Okay, good, you need to know.
It's an open source relational database management system.
Okay, so first of all, she said open source, so what does that mean, Brittany?
Anyone can access the code.
Anyone can access the code if they want, right? And what else does it mean, usually? The cost-wise?
It's free.
Free. And relational database management. It's used extensively on the web, on the World Wide Web. It's used extensively for websites. And where do you think you need a database? Have you been on the web anywhere that you think they're using a database? Lexi, where do you think, what companies do you think use a database?
Just like any company that has to store a lot of information.
Right. Have you ever bought anything on the web?
Mm-hmm.
Where have you bought it from?
Like
Amazon is classic, right? Amazon, have you bought from Amazon, what do? They give you a history, they do recommendations. Have you ever had recommendations that they give you in Amazon? How do they get those recommendations? If you bought this book, other people recommend that they bought those books. How do they get that? From a database, from everyone, and seeing what are the patterns of that data. So anytime you deal with e-commerce, it's going to be a database management system. Some are more sophisticated, frankly, than others, but in this case, they're all going to do it, and I can do queries. Have you ever gotten recommendations from Amazon on what to buy? How do they know?
Just from like your past purchases.
Past purchases that are stored where? In a database management system. And making recommendations, and for sales, is that important? Of course. For marketing, is that important? All the marketing, the different ads that you get. Are the ads targeted a lot of times to what you've done? Have you ever gone searching for something and then later on seeing that it's following you, you're looking for a trip? What are they doing? Basically, they're following and trying in terms of databases. So those database management systems, they're called here structured database. And what's the importance here in database management, you can put these on, are three of these. One is called data redundancy. One is called data isolation, and the other is data inconsistency. So if I ask you then, Brianna, what's the problem with database, and what would it eliminate, is data inconsistency. You remember when I talked about they have the address that possibly for Alex they may have then updated for the registrar, but what else? Admissions may have not have gotten it, and housing may have not have gotten it, and the health center may have not gotten it. So I'm going to have what we call data inconsistency. That various copies of my data don't match. Do you understand that? So Marcel, in this case, data redundancy, what's the problem with data redundancy? That I have that data, and isn't this straight here, Kara, that when I had it in numerous parts, was the data redundant? It was, so it wasted a lot of room. I don't have to do Kara's address 100 times across the university. So it's going to be that data redundancy and data isolation. When I have the School of Business, guess what? When I have my notes, I never knew Estella was in the tennis team. I didn't get access to that, so I'm not even able to tell her, you know what, you should get a scholarship. I can't even afford that, you know what, you're perfect for a scholarship. Because what? All I have is all the students. I never knew she was on the tennis team, and she was at that point. So you can see, at this point, I can do it. So those are going to be important, that data redundancy, data isolation, and along with that, is that I want to have what I call data integrity. So you can put in your note there, in terms of data integrity, what's that mean? So Allie, what does data integrity mean, you think?
Like, that it's protected and it knows what to share with.
What is data integrity? Who can help her out?
Like, we know
What, Frank?
It's accurate.
That I can rely on. Have you ever heard about integrity, that your parents ever want to instill in you integrity? Is basically that I can rely on that person. Their word is their word, right? They're not going to be some flim-flam con artist. They didn't raise you to be, right? They raised in terms of your integrity. It's the same thing, that I can rely on the data. That if I can see here, the GPA says 3.8 for a student, I can rely on that 3.8. Want to hear a story here? Stories are good. You know what I want you to do and encourage you in your projects is to do something that you really like, and you can be entrepreneurs. How many entrepreneur majors do what? How many entrepreneurs that everybody wants to be kind of your own brand and be an entrepreneur? So what do they always tell you, an entrepreneur? Do something that you know. So I was at another institution, and there was another institution here where somebody decided to do what they know. So what ended up happening was, hey, how are you? Come on in. You can come in. We're going to be what? We'll be about 20 minutes. Yeah, come on in.
We can wait outside.
It's up to you.
Yeah, so like 20 minutes?
20 minutes. 20 minutes, perfect. Okay, we'll see you. Good to see you guys. We got a whole gang. So what happened is we had a student and he knew about grades. So what did he do with grades? Everybody knows what grades he knew about grades, so he's gonna make a business about grades. So what do you think he did?
A business about grades?
What do you mean about grades?
What kind of business?
Entrepreneur, that's what do you think, Brendan?
Like doing people's work for them?
One is doing people's work, and that was too much for him, that was too hard, but he had access to the computers.
Posting notes?
Posting notes,
Changing their grades.
changing their grades, that was his business. And you know he got caught because I'm telling the story, right? So basically this was his business, and the question is, we talked about the security here, so basically he changed grades for a little entrepreneur, and he was at that institute. So how did he get caught? Because I'm telling the story, right? How did he get caught?
Left a trace.
He left some kind of trace, so how did he get caught? Andrea, what do you think? He left a trace. That what?
They tracked him back to him.
He maybe tracked him back to it. What other ideas? Why would somebody testify against him?
Because they thought it was unfair.
They thought it was unfair. Why did they think it was unfair?
There were a spot. Someone grades went up when they didn't do as much work.
Okay, somebody's grade. What else? What usually gets people caught? Usually when people start, when you see all those Greek kind of movies and stuff, when do they get caught? When they're too greedy. So when did he get caught? When he raised his price. So it was like, I don't remember and what he did was, he raised his price. You know, how long did it take him to do from an A to an F, from an F to an A versus a B to A? It was the same amount of work, right? But what he did was he charged for each grade you wanted. So if you got an F and you wanted 2 grades better, you got this, you would pay for each grade. So he got a little greedy, and they told him. And it was really bad because it was on one system, and it was really bad because he was the son of a professor, and it was really bad because then those that got jobs out in the community said, wait a minute, Lexi, looks like you got a really good grade point average. Is this real, or is it, was somebody paying for it? So you can see those vulnerabilities of what happens to their vulnerabilities. So the data, when it's in one location, just like we talked about before, that data in one location becomes a problem. So you can see here, I talked about the registrar's office and so forth. So this is just the area in which you need to know about here is the lowest amount of data is really, when you think about it, what the computer reads is just zeros and ones. So a bit is just like a 0 and 1. And then if I go higher up, a byte is what? Just 1 character. So if I see Brian, right, and basically you have 5 characters to your name, or 5 bytes. And a field is like first name, last name, address. So everybody with me? Bit is the slowest amount. Then above that, I'm going to have a byte, which is a character. Above that is I have a field. And together, they make up a record. So a student record would be all of the fields of Alex, right? That's pretty simple. And then when I have a file, it makes up all my students then in my class then make up a file. And then I have those files. I have the student files, I have the faculty files, and they make up university databases. I can have several of those databases, and that's what they call the hierarchy of the databases. And they call something a relational database model. And you can put that down here. It's called relational database model. And a relational database model, you have a lot of jargon in the book, and I'll tell you simple. Everybody know what a table is? And everybody know what a sheet in Excel is? That's a table. The columns are my fields. The rows are my records. So you can put that in your notes. The columns are my fields. The rows are my records. Together they make up a table. And what you do in a relational database is those tables, is you create a table, just like here, right, that I have a table of rows and I have columns, and along with my rows and my columns, before you go on, I have my data. I have what I call my primary key and my secondary key. My primary key is a lot of times what I sort on. So I can have a primary key, is I can sort by alphabetical order. I have my secondary key. I have last name, first name. And the advantage of a relational database is that I can communicate from one table to another. And the key here is big data. When I have big data, when we're accumulating then my big data, I have my big data that I use then structured, unstructured, and semi-structured data. What's the problem? What is unstructured data? Unstructured data can be, for instance, video. And what I do from big data is I create ways to analyze my data to give me I can give my, not only my queries, I can query my big data, but I can find patterns to my data. I can find using machine learning. Anybody hear that term? Machine learning? It's basically having the machine, the computers, find patterns in my data that I didn't know about. A lot of times they use it for stock markets. They have the algorithm, but I have the machine try to find out, the machine try to find the data, have the machine try to find for me the patterns that I didn't know about. Find me things about my customers that I didn't know. For instance, Lexi, it could be, what have you bought on Amazon, for instance? Okay, bedding. So it may be that if you buy that bedding, then maybe we should think about, maybe you need rugs, or maybe in this case that you moved, and if I know that you moved the dresses, maybe then I can sell you some more. So and it may be in terms of the age of after you graduate, you may have different needs than when you were living in the dorms. So I can find that areas in which I can get those machines to work. So the characteristics of the issues with the big data, that sometimes we contact the big data and we say that it's dirty data. What do we mean by dirty data? Leah, what do you think that means dirty data?
That it's bad.
It's either bad or what?
We collectively work.
Low quality, like. I don't know.
Sometimes what it is, it's
False.
missing fields.
Yeah.
Missing fields, incorrect data. I have to clean up the data. I may have city, state, but the zip codes are incorrect. For instance, a lot of times in the big data, what they do projects in advance, and they basically, many times in big data, they have to spend 80% of the time cleaning up the data before they can make resolutions to it. So there's ways in which you have to do big data. And you remember we talked about SQL? You remember we talked about SQL? SQL stands for what? Coleman.
Structured query
Language, right? They have now something called NoSQL. NO is not only SQL. So the N and the O stand, where put in your notes there, is the N and the O stand for not only structured data, is when I have data that's not set up in fields and rows. So putting big data to use then in experiments is, there's something called Hadoop. Let's research Hadoop. What do we got? H-A-D-O-O-P. H-A-D-O-O-P. What do we get? Yes.
It's an open source software.
First of all, open source software. It sounds similar, what, Brittany? To what? That it seems that it's going to be more or less that people can use it either very cheaply or for free. What else?
It's used for distributed storage and processing of databases of big data.
Okay, distributed storage. What did we say about database management system, Kari? Remember, it was all in one place. What's the problem about having it all in one place? Ben, what's the problem of having my data all in one place?
Risky.
It's more vulnerable, right? It's like putting all my money in my drawer, in one drawer, right? It's better to pass it around. So what they have, you can put in your notes, then they have what they call distributed data management systems, that my data is not stored just in one location, but it's stored in multiple locations. You remember, you've heard about the cloud. We'll talk about it more next week. But in the cloud, a lot of times it's distributed because if one server goes down, think about Amazon. You think they keep all their data in one server? What do you think, Lexi? My Amazon person. You think Amazon, how big it is, do you think they keep it, they have one place in Seattle and that's the place where, and one computer? No way. They distribute it. Come on. Just think about it. If there's an earthquake in California, right, that the chances are we're not going to be storing also in Florida, or in this case, it's going to be, people want to be close to their data too, in China and to other places. So Hadoop then is a way in which to use big data. It's a way in which to do big data, open source, in distributed amounts. So this is the big data. They're talking about it on ways in which to do big data. What else do I need to go over? The other area in which we want to use is big data is used in a lot of different functional areas, marketing and so forth. And then these are the last that I want to go over with you right now. One is called the data warehouse and the other one's called the data mart. What's the difference and who cares? We'll have it on the text. Data warehouse versus a data mart. Everybody knows what a warehouse is, right? A place where we're going to store, right? Something. A data warehouse is an area in which I'm going to be storing data, but it's not transactional. It is not live. I use a data warehouse to do studies with. It's not my inventory database, but rather a place where I can store my data to do experiments with, to do hypotheses with. So the data warehouse is basically storage. It resides on hardware servers, and they have software that deals with the data warehouse. A data mart is a segment of my data to do the experiment with. So a data mart may be a marketing exercise. So for instance, I work with a car rental company, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to do a data mart to see, let's look at our data to see where we can sell more. What's the problem in renting cars for people under a certain age, under 25?
Insurance is ridiculous.
Insurance is ridiculous. What's the prices versus when you're over 25 and less than 25?
I don't know, but I just know it's high.
It's high. What else? Some companies don't even rent. So what this company wanted to do was to see, is it really true? And why don't they want to rent? Higher risk. And they said, is that really true? And think about it. So they looked at their data for a data mart and said, let me take all those renters under 25, and we can even divide it up then between male and female, and see, is it really true? Are they really a higher risk, and how much higher risk? And what they found out in their data mart, data warehouse, was that it really wasn't that much of a higher risk, and then they went ahead and they geared their sales to that market between 18 and 25 and said, guess what? We're not going to charge you crazy rates. We'll charge you normal rates, and then they get that business. So that's the difference between a data warehouse and a data mart. So you can just see this, and then you can see here that in that system we have something called OLTP, which stands for Online Transaction Processing. So it allows me to online process all my transactions. And then I can have my generic resources, so you can see that this is my warehouse. These are pictures of a database, but they're part of my warehouse, and you can see that I can use external databases. This is online transactions. This is my old data. This is my enterprise. This is my point of sale, and I can get some web documents. And then from these data marts, then I'm able to do reporting. So, and you see here, query. What's query mean? Coleman, what's query? Q-U-E-R. Why? Just asking questions. So there's tools to query the database, to query those data marts. So I have this on my source systems here. I have my data integration and my sourcing, and then I have my users on this end. That's all this means. These are my relational databases, and in my relational databases, you can see here I can have dimensions. So I can have my years. Anybody ever used pivot tables before? That's basically in those relational databases, those are the pivot tables that they talk about for their data cubes. So this is data cubes. What else do I need? You need to store the data. I need the quality, the governance we talked about, the users, concepts, all of these concepts that we need to know. Explicit versus tacit. And we have creating my knowledge and disseminating. So, and then I have my function. So can you do me a favor, Alex? Can you call those gentlemen in, and then I'll answer questions. Just go out to them and just tell them.
I want to ask, so the test isn't next week, but the week after?
So we can spend the whole time. I think it's useful because there's so much. And I want you to do well, right? Don't you think that's a good idea? You know what I mean? So what I want you to do between now and next week is go through this material and say, you know what, I'm fuzzy on this. You know what I'm saying? What? You ask questions, and then I'll point you, I'll do like a review session for you of all the things that you need. So for next week then, hi, how are you?
Hi, good. Are we in early? Too early?
No, come on in.
Okay.
Wow, we got a whole crew here.
We'll take 15 more people. No, we're good.
What?
Well, I'm
So
the,
take a seat.
I'm the VIP, so I went to UM.
Okay, you are?
So-
Great, great. So you can sit wherever you'd like
Yeah.
on this
Oh,
one.
where's the
Okay.
alumni seat?
What?
The alumni seat.
The alumni seat is right, wherever you would like it, we can crown you. Okay, so how are we gonna arrange this? So how do you wanna set this up? You wanna introduce yourself?
Well, actually, I'm not the speaker, but
I
I'm
know.
going to announce Ken is going to be speaking.
Okay, Ken here?
Ken's right here.
Oh, great, Ken,
Perfect-
good,
perfect
good,
time.
hi, good to Ken. So, you know how I wanna do it? I have two that we can set up here, and maybe we can even take a minute. How do you wanna set this up, Ken? Because I wanted you to go first to talk
What I was gonna do
about.
is have our spokesperson, Mike, introduce me. Because
Okay,
it's
okay.
A wonderful way to start, so I don't have to say, hi, everyone, my name is Ken.
Okay.
Everyone, I'd like you to meet Ken. Say hi, Ken.
There you go.
Okay, so what I wanted you to do is we have two speakers here that I wanted to do. This group is a great group, and these are basically our business students.
Okay.
From various, they're entrepreneurs, finance, what else, marketing, econ,
That's it.
entrepreneurs.
Beautiful.
And what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring all this to life, and especially getting new technologies, and especially on the area of blockchain. They've done some reading on it, but they're a little bit fuzzy, can I say?
That's
Some of them,
perfect.
some have done. Who's been trading in Bitcoin? I have a couple of people here that have been doing some Bitcoin. Others have heard about the technology. So I wanted you to talk about your banking, since we have a lot of finance and maybe what's happening. And then we have Richard, who is a pharmacist, who's thinking about the area and doing blockchain in healthcare. And then we have the Kinder group, right? Did you want to talk about your Kinder group? I don't know if we'll have time, but in terms of just basically, what are these folks doing in the whole area of blockchain? So this is what I wanted, and we can go to your website if you want us to do it, or we can
Oh,
look
sure.
at some
In
other
fact-
things that you have, Ken, and just give it, this is a formal, informal kind of group. I just wanted to see, since you're doing new technologies, what is the area of the technology? Also, if you're interested, some of these folks may be interested in even internships or finding out, working with you. They've experienced a lot of times people coming in terms of social media and other ways which students can, get
Well,
a hand.
you just presented the whole purpose of our speech, so I won't need to speak today, so.
Thank you.
But
Basically,
I wanted to see.
That's our end goal, is to bring people on board, anyone who's interested in various
Right,
areas.
so
of
where
partnership
do
and
I
development.
go here? What I'd like to do here is, and then I'll have your speaker then introduce you, Ken, but is there a website or somewhere that I can go?
Sure, nationpay.io.
Okay, so everybody can go to it, nationpay.io, okay. Let's see, okay. And then, yeah.
From here, people can download the white paper if they want
Okay.
and look at that. We typically start with this, and then page 2 of the white paper serves as a pitch deck to tell you a little bit about it.
Okay, so
Whatever you
why
want.
don't you, we're ready,
Go
so
into
you
this.
can, you want your
All right, Mike,
guide.
I'll
I
to
just
introduce-
wanted to quickly introduce myself. If some of you, can I just see by a show of hands, how many of you are in business classes, entrepreneur classes?
We all are.
Okay, so perfect. My background is, I'm a professional speaker, a motivational speaker, and a peak performance coach. So I had a multi-million-dollar business that I built when I was 21, sold it to a multi-billion-dollar business. I'm from Atlantic City. I came down, I know this much about cryptocurrency. We met 2 days ago.
Oh, wow.
So-
And you're already his spokesman.
I am. Here's my
Hands
interest.
down.
You always have in any situation, people at this level of knowledge, people here, and people way up here. I'm down here, some of you may be at that place right now, but all I can tell you is this is what I know, because I speak to some people at very high levels that are very wealthy and very smart, wealthier than me and smarter than me. Those are the people I want to learn from, and those are the people that you should want to learn from. Success begets success. Surround yourself with people smarter than you. So all I know are these 3 things. Anything with social media, anything with mobile devices, and anything with cryptocurrency blockchain are the hottest things. They're the new gold mine, the new internet. In fact, what email is to all of us now, remember, do you guys remember letterheads? People wrote, no, they, so there used to be, people wrote letters on letterheads, on paper. Now we don't do that anymore. I mean, these are huge changes, cultural changes. Well, this is a new currency. It's as big as the gold mine. So the fact that you have to be knowledgeable and expert at something that could really change your lives and be part of your lives is important. I mean, I'm doing it. I'm 61 years old, and I know that I have to be part of this because I believe it's the next big thing. And you're doing it at a perfect age. Many of you are what, 17 to 22? Is that fair to say you're in that range? I have a 26-year-old son who we talk all the time, so I get this, and I understand that everyone here wants to be successful, and all I try to help my clients do is accelerate and maximize their success by being aware of things that they need to be aware of, and then taking advantage of those things by talking to experts, internalizing it, and taking action on it. So with no further ado, you're about to hear a guy who is an expert, a top thought leader, which we recognized the first 15 minutes when we spoke. I know someone who is full of it and someone who knows it. He knows it, and that's why we're partnering already after knowing each other. We met at Office Depot. literally, that's, I'm a magician. I showed a magic trick. I said, come on over, take a look. He saw the magic, and then we created.
Later on, we'll have you do your magic.
And then I brought some magic tricks if you want to see. If you like magic, and he liked the magic trick, and then we developed a relationship, and his mom lives in my development.
Okay.
So without further ado, I want you to meet Ken, and we're going to open it up to questions, and then we want you to send an email in to learn about him. Okay, go ahead.
Now that you all know my life story,
Yeah.
first of all, I'm very excited. Today, I just had a meeting with the head of corporate development, just under the CEO of one of the top regional banks in the north, in the east, in the whole East Coast. I can't disclose yet, but we're going to do what's called an MOU. Typically, when you partner with somebody on a new technology, you sign an agreement that's kind of slightly formal, slightly informal, called a memorandum of understanding. It lets the people collaborate further while there's a little bit more than just a non-disclosure agreement signed, and allows two people who are in a position to help each other in technology advance the technology further. The banks are very interested in what we're developing, and I'll go over that platform in a minute. First, since it seems that I guess this class is on a plethora of technologies, not just blockchain.
Right.
Okay, so that said, I'll introduce the stages of blockchain known as 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0.
Okay.
Blockchain 1.0 is what everyone knows as Bitcoin, which is the original blockchain ledger, which just allows a transfer of value from one person to another. The way it does it is quite simple, but explaining it could either take 2 minutes or it could take hours. I'll be really brief about explaining it just because this is not a blockchain class, so to speak, and I'd like you guys to have some understanding of what it is. The concept of being able to transfer value from one person to another in what's called a decentralized manner is a very important point to advance the world away from centralized structures like banks, for example. So even though our platform is partnering with banks, we are doing so in a way that we are decentralizing the process of value transfer, which we'll get to in a moment. Basically, the way Bitcoin works is the easiest way to envision it is to take an example where there's a universe of just say four people, 4 computers, right? We'll call the people 1, 2, 3, and 4. Person 1 wants to transfer value to person 2. So they do so using software which stores in what's called a memory pool this transaction. The idea that 1 Bitcoin has been transferred, say, from computer 1 to computer 2. To make this actually happen, there's computer number 3 and computer number 4 that are competing to solve a very complex problem that is unimportant, involving random numbers and involving finding a solution to an obscure, difficult problem that takes a long time to solve. When that problem is solved, computer 1 and 2, which are also called nodes, verify what computer 3 and 4 came up with, and the transaction then becomes official. And it's stored on all 4 of the computers. So The two roles that are played to make this happen are what's called the mining role. These are the miners. Their incentive for using such a huge amount of computing power is to receive a Bitcoin, or 2 or 3, or in this case 12.5 in 2018. But in the early days, it was more, and nobody was exchanging 1 Bitcoin in the early days because a Bitcoin was 20 cents. So that first transaction, which was called the Genesis transaction, might have been for 10,000 Bitcoin. The point is, everyone in the community participates in storing the information about who has what. So that's why it's called a distributed ledger. And I'm sure you all pretty much know that, right?
Right.
All right, so then blockchain 2.0 is what most people call Ethereum, which is like Bitcoin in the sense that value can be transferred. Right? You can transfer Ether in a wallet from one person to another. But in a particular address, there's not only the coin or the token, but there's also the potential to have what's called a smart contract, which allows you not only to control the mechanism in which coins are transferred, but to create your own coin and have that coin float on top of that same network. What the hope of blockchain 3.0 is to combine all these coins together so that value can be transferred among the coins seamlessly without having centralized exchanges and without necessarily even having a bunch of decentralized exchanges out there, but potentially one marketplace for everyone. This is where the world is heading. So what we have is this banking platform that seeks to unify all the bank's value transfer processes. What's happening right now is banks are scrambling to create their own currency for value transfer because they know they're about to be left out. If not by Bitcoin, then by some other coin which will allow people to just do business routinely without having to have their money in the banks. And the banks are very worried about that. The problem with the existing mechanisms in place, like Bitcoin and Bitcoin ATMs, is the volatility with respect to what people buy things in. If you're in this country, you buy things in the dollar, and Bitcoin every day has a different value relative to the dollar. So you can't use Bitcoin with faith to buy and sell things unless you buy the Bitcoin at the very last minute, and then you buy whatever it is you're buying. But you're certainly not going to buy a $500,000 house with Bitcoin tomorrow if you're worried that before tomorrow.
20%.
What's that? Yeah,
Or
you
the
could lose
value.
20% or you could gain 20% of that value in the matter of the day. People who are buying houses with Bitcoin, because that's now a new platform being offered by several services, are doing so because they've already got many millions of dollars of Bitcoin, and they just need to unload it. So what better way than to buy a house with it or use Bitcoin ATMs so that it can be done potentially avoiding tax ramifications for a number of reasons. People are using Bitcoin to purchase things. But for the basic consumer who has most of their wealth in dollars, it doesn't make sense to transfer it all to Bitcoin and then hold it and buy a house with it. So what we decided to do is come up with a platform that was different than what's out there today, that would allow people to get value out of the banks and then transact business with it. The two types of business are either buying something from a merchant or remitting money to a friend and family member. And we handle both of those in a very novel way by allowing the bank to create their own currency in our wallet, which acts as a promissory note. So if you have $1,000 in your bank account and you want to put $500 into your wallet, you just press a few buttons on the wallet and the $500 comes out of your account and is now in the token world. You're now in the blockchain universe with those $500. But if you're using, say, United Bank United, for example, so now you have 500 Bank United tokens. Those tokens are pegged to the dollar. So that's a very important point. You don't have to spend them tomorrow. You don't have to worry that the value is going to change tomorrow or the next day.
So why would someone, if it's pegged to the dollar, so what is the motivation for somebody to do that rather than just keep their own bank account?
So the motivation is, looking at the economy as a whole, there's several factors. That money can be used to buy stuff at a merchant without any fees. And it could also be used to remit to another bank on the network to friends without any fees instantly. In fact, the fees are actually 1% or less overall for those actions. But an even more important point is that the bank account that the money's coming out of doesn't have to be a debit account. It can be a credit account. This is a very important point because up until now, you don't have any access to credit without Visa being in the mix or MasterCard. Even if it's a bank-sponsored credit card, like through Chase or Capital One, the banks all have the Visa logo, the MasterCard logo, and even if you use something like Apple Pay, which is just a wrapper for those cards, Visa, MasterCard, they still enjoy the profit on that. They're still part of the partners along with Apple Pay. Apple Pay might only make 0.15% as a processor, but the cards still have to share, the banks still have to share the credit rates with the credit card manufacturers. So what we do is we eliminate not only the credit card manufacturers, but also these payment processors like Apple Pay, for example. So now the relationship exists only between the bank and you, the client, and the merchant. So if you're taking money out of your credit account from the bank, and it's now in your wallet, now you can buy groceries, scan a QR code, and pay the same way you might with Apple Pay. But even though it's through a credit account, the merchant is paid instantly. There's no 25-day wait period. This is a huge thing for the merchants. They can now take those tokens and buy stuff from wholesalers immediately and not have to wait 25 days. This means the prices of everything begins to go down. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, what's 2%? What's 3%? Who cares, right? It's not saving me money, but there's a bigger picture. Not only will the prices go down everywhere by 2 to 3%, but in other countries, credit is much higher. If you go to Argentina right now and you want to use your credit card in Argentina to buy something, you're going to spend up to 25% in fees. You go to Costa Rica, you're going to spend 5 to 8%, just because it's through a credit card. And the merchants there's nothing that they can do about it. Even PayPal is a minimum of 3%. And
So you're gonna cut it down to what percent?
1% overall. Right?
1%.
It's even less when you consider what happens once the token.
So let me ask you, so the bank, their incentive to, because they're gonna be losing money by going with you, but you're saying they'll go with you because they'll lose out completely if other people go to blockchain and
Well,
they'll be out of the picture?
that is a good angle, but it's not entirely true. The banks will not lose at all because what they're losing is the relationship with Visa and MasterCard.
Right.
But remember, they still offer credit at their own rates. The moment you take money out of your tokens, out of your credit account, you're now still liable to pay the same rate you were paying before.
Mhm.
But the merchants won't have to pay 2 or 3%, and it's instant. And that rate, like let's say 19% yearly, if you're not paid in full, will go down because Visa's not part of it anymore. So the only people
So
who will
you're getting
lose,
out, you're shrinking that intermediary, is that what you're trying to do?
because there's less hands in the soup, right?
Less hands.
So you
So
will,
so what will Visa being a large organization, they'll create their own, or
so
how
they're
do we-
scrambling and they're doing so right now, but they're still in the picture, so the rates aren't being reduced. And if so, if it becomes a war, right, the one who will
Then
win
it's
is the
too
one
tough.
with the least amount of players. That's just the mathematics of it.
Right.
If there's 2 people in a transaction, then they will ultimately win over an organization that has 4 people in a transaction. Just because it's a numbers game, and if there's one person that can gain from it, then they will win because they can afford to have less fees. Now here's
So you're going towards the best, so you're a B2B play, meaning you're going after banks, is that what? it is?
Yes, but at the same time, it's B to customer because we
You have to
create
get
the
the
infrastructure so that the client can directly receive value straight from the
So
bank.
you have to educate
through-
the client, it has to be two ways.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, and it's one line of integration code at the bank, so they love that. They're really happy that it's the integration is through their existing infrastructure through online banking. The client just accesses online banking the same way and pushes a button, and he's now got tokens in his wallet. Now here's the big kicker. This is why the banks really like us, because there's something called float. I don't know if you're all familiar with how float works at a bank, but basically when the bank has your money,
They can use it.
they can lend on it. They're not lending your money, but what they're doing is they're using it as collateral so that they can borrow from the Fed, which are the 12 Federal Reserve banks, at a very low interest rate, and then they can lend that money at a higher rate. So at least 70% of that. So now, if you take your money out of the ATM, they can't do that anymore. But now if you're using this token wallet, the money is yours to use, but what happens to, let's say you empty your account, $1,000 was what was there. Sorry, so little, but now it's in your bank, now it's in your token wallet. That $1,000 that was in your account now transfers to a reserve account at the bank. And so they actually still have those funds. The actual cash is there, and you just have a promissory note for the bank to pay you, or to pay whoever the last person in the chain is that ends up returning those funds back to the bank. And this is where it gets interesting. So what we've been describing up until now is just one microeconomy of one bank and their merchants and clients. Other banks will have their own tokens, and some will be pegged to different denominations, different fiat, like peso in Mexico or the yen. We facilitate the merging of these tokens so that over time, banks can merge and items can slowly, naturally start to be priced in these combined tokens. So it's easy to envision what that means. If it's a Chase Citibank token, they've combined forces because it's pegged to the dollar. But what about when it's like the Mexican National Bank token combined with Texas Bank, because they're on the border with each other and because there's a lot of merchants that play with both pesos and dollars? Suddenly now, for the first time, an item at the store can actually be priced in that combination token of the MNBT Texas Bank token, right, which has an actual value that's significant, half peso, half dollar. It has the average value of whatever that is with respect to the dollar. But once things start to be priced in a combined token, it becomes like something being priced in Bitcoin. Bitcoin, the jump from the dollar to Bitcoin is like this. The jump from the dollar to the dollar peso in a community of merchants that are already thinking in both currencies is a lot easier to make. So we figure we'll have a good 10 to 15 year run with this before one of two things will happen. Either all our banks will be merged and we'll have the one universal world currency through our platform, or Bitcoin will emerge, not be volatile anymore when it's 100,000 a token, and one of the players will win.
So where are you in this process? How far are you along?
We expect to actually have a test platform within 12 months, perhaps sooner, depending on the seed rounds and partnerships we have in place. We also have MOUs signed with an escrow bank through a debt consolidator in New York. The way escrow agents work is they collect money monthly from people with poor credit, and they're not in the business of actually providing credit. And so this will be the first time where an escrow company acts as a bank and will actually provide credit to poor credit customers.
Okay. So it'll be another avenue.
Yeah, and we're doing so in a very novel way because so when you have the token universe, you can do some interesting things. One of the things we're able to do is have something called directed credit. So if you have 3 credit cards that you're kind of delinquent on, the debt consolidation company helps you pay that debt by only owing, say, half of it, or 3/4 of it, and they take the interest away. So you're really happy. But at the same time, you don't have any credit cards now, and you still like to have one. So the escrow company, through NationPay, can allow you to have a credit card that you're only allowed to use, for example, at a supermarket or a clothing store, at a limited amount, maybe $500 a month. But this is revolutionary, this is disruptive, because you can't use it everywhere. You can't be irresponsible with it. You can't go to the liquor store and buy stuff. So it helps people be responsible. It will be the first time in history that the escrow company itself can act as a bank, because they have all the same regulations in place anyway, but now they can act as a commercial bank. We even have a construction bank in China, and China is pretty much impossible to break through into. But this looks like something that's going to happen. We're going to have a ceremonial signing in Hong Kong shortly. And, so figure about 12 months or sooner, depending on when the next seed rounds come in.
And then when your investors get what?
The
When
investors,
you're going around and let's say these students were at our university, they want to invest, or their families want to invest, what do they get for it?
So the investors get tokens,
They get, and
Right.
your token,
Right.
you're doing an ICO, then you're doing,
Right. By the way, you don't have to do an ICO to actually be able to offer
right,
tokens.
but are you doing an ICO?
But
or-
yes, we do plan to do an ICO. Right now, we're in the pre-sale stages. Depending on how they go, we may not have to do the public portion of the ICO. The general thinking with ICOs is that you want to always do one because you want to give everyone an opportunity.
Mhm.
But what's been happening recently is so many of these ICOs are oversubscribed in the beginning, so that the smaller players don't really have a chance to invest. Add to that SEC regulation, we're calling ourselves an equity token so that we can meet with future regulations. What that means is that if you're from the United States, you need to be an accredited investor, which means you have to show at least a 1040 of 200,000 to 300,000 a year. It makes it hard for the little guy to get in, but people from outside the U.S. can still invest 1 year.
So
2
you're
years.
doing this in the United States then?
We are doing this in the United States. We are only accepting from accredited investors in the U.S. and from non-accredited outside the U.S. There are exceptions that have to do with people who only want to use the service, like let's say they work for a bank and they only want to use the service to add their bank to the system, and then they're using the utility measure of the token. But yeah, it's an
So
interesting-
you're based in New York?
We're based in New York and also in Taiwan and in Taipei. We have a small office there, and also in Paraguay. Our team members are scattered. One of them was the lead analyst at the third largest hedge fund called CIFC, and one of them was the former director of the Latin American Bank in Buenos Aires, and also the head of foreign affairs of Paraguay. So what he's doing for us is he's writing new legislation just for us that's going to allow a cooperative to act as a bank. And this is an interesting point.
In Paraguay?
In Paraguay. What's interesting there is there's a particular cooperative of alumni, of students, recently graduated, who suddenly need money, right? And what better way to get money if you're a member of this alumni cooperative that can extend credit to you so that you can buy your first house or buy a car? Well, if you have 1.5 million students to draw upon, or alumni to draw upon, it's a powerful cooperative. So now with this new legislation, they'll actually be able to offer credit directly using our tokens, so that the alumni won't have to, or the client won't have to actually drive in his car 3 hours to the headquarters of the building to get the cash.
So what's your biggest challenge going forward? Because it's kind of like a whole new universe. Just even to explain it, most people don't even understand it in doing it. So
Sure.
your biggest challenge is what? To get the banks on board? What is your biggest challenge? To get to be able within the United States with the regulators? What is your biggest challenge?
I think not with the regulators, because we're doing this completely as an equity token.
Okay.
The challenges, before today I might have said, well, meeting with officials of a bank, right? But then after today, and after having get several MOUs established, you realize there's other hurdles. They're constantly changing.
Right.
But I'd say having good developers, a good team working with you that are loyal.
And where's your development work?
So we have 2 developers out of Barcelona, and we have 2 in New York, and 2 that we're considering taking on in San Francisco. So we'll have about 6. And then a couple of independent contractors to write our coin, which are out of Russia.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of really
Right. We're
talented.
gonna have some Russians here on Wednesday that are developing. Have you heard of 8Base? They're basically doing a lot of work they're based in Miami and Kiev and St. Petersburg.
Okay, what are they working on?
They're working on it. I'll talk to you afterwards about it. But it's basically a way in which to do a platform to do easier development,
Oh, okay.
quicker development.
So what I was hoping to do is
Yeah.
maybe, like in closing,
Yeah.
is let you know about another platform we're working on, simply because the two are very related. I really believe in blockchain 3.0 and being able to integrate communities together, and that means upper layer platforms like what we're doing. In the case of the banking platform, you picture a bunch of nodes where each node is a bank, and those banks can interchange value through what's called a decentralized exchange. So if somebody wants to trade the Citibank token because they're remitting money, they're remitting 50 Citibank tokens for, say, 40 Euro tokens, Santander tokens, because you have a family member in Spain and you want to get money to them, you want to make that seamless. You don't want to take time to wonder how that's gonna happen. So through a decentralized exchange, there's a market maker that allows that to happen.
So your
And-
other company is called what?
What's that?
So you have another?
Oh, yeah, so the other company, which is called RealSafe, is
So
a,
I can do real safe, I can just type it in,
oh, sure, you're welcome to do that, realsafe.co.
.co.
Has a similar structure with completely different purpose. Yeah, .co, and you should find it that way.
I got real safe dot
Yeah, there it is.
C-O-U-Q,
That one, right.
oh, this one?
Imagine that every node, if you picture a platform as just a group of nodes with links between them, right, points with lines between them, each point represents something. In the case of the banking platform, each point is a bank that has its own currency that's pegged to the dollar or other fiat. In the case of RealSafe, each node is a company, any company that has its own currency as well. That's the comparison between the two. That's the
So you're gonna do, so this is a service, basically you're gonna take companies and help them create this?
This allows anybody who has shares in a company to exchange those shares for tokens in a passive action, meaning the tokenization event doesn't require any further deals to be made. It's just changing the notion of ownership from shares to tokens. Once that happens, then all the services that are offered on this platform become available. All the magic begins to happen. For example, if you're a CFO of a company and you have 10 partners, and every year, what a drag at the end of the year, you have to pay dividends to all those 10 people. And you have
So
to
you're
go to
gonna
the
do a
bank,
fee?
wait online, send dividends to each of the 10 people, right? So through this platform, you'd send those dividends to one account, and they're automatically distributed based on the proportion of ownership of coins that each one has.
And how far are you on this?
It has the same timeline, about 12 months timeline. And the token structure is being organized the same way. The way we do business is instead of having the coin an integral part of the economy, our own coin is divorced from the economy. What this means is the fees we collect, the very small fees we collect on people doing business with each other, are used to buy our token back and put it in a reserve partially and burn partially the token. What you might have been taught already is when tokens are burned, it's analogous to dividends being paid out because it creates scarcity in the coin. So,
Are there any questions? So let's take a few and then maybe what we'll do, and then we'll have Richard and his folks come over, and then we'll end a little bit early, and then they can ask you additional questions.
oh yeah, sure,
Let's take some
anything about,
questions.
it doesn't even have to be about the platforms. Any
Yeah.
questions, I'll be happy to try and help.
So you're buying your tokens back with that small percentage of every piece that you're selling, and then are you doing that so there's no inflation when you burn it?
Yeah, so burning is not necessarily to avoid inflation. It happens to do that. It creates deflation, which creates scarcity. And yes, you're right. The reason I say not necessarily, I was hesitant, is because we also have a small inflationary measure each year, like 0.5%, very small. And that's to take care of a situation where, let's say, the network wasn't prospering, or there was some unforeseen circumstance that we needed to provide liquidity into the exchanges, we'd have a little extra token to deal with. Most communities, if they have inflation at all, it's a huge amount. So yes, the deflationary component with the network being at all successful is huge compared to the inflationary component. And that's exactly right, yes. Deflation emulates dividends.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was just wondering some of the challenges that might arise from meeting with a bank like you did today and sort of getting them on board with this new
Good question.
decentralized system. Like I'm sure even the word decentralized for a bank might make someone pretty
Yeah,
scared. So how do you
there's a huge number of questions that are asked
Mhm.
that to allay their concerns, allay their fears. You need to come across it in a way where they know that they're going to be at the cutting edge of technology and helping their clients, number one. Number two is most people are aware now. Most of these bank officers are aware. They've either studied crypto a little bit. They know what their colleagues are doing. They know that the banks are scrambling to create their own tokens. They don't want to be left out. They also know that if they do nothing and none of the other banks did anything, that eventually there would be no banks at all. So with this system, the banks can still remain, but the clients don't lose out just because the banks remain. They can still enjoy their making their money on their float, while tokens are left out Once you take your money out in the form of tokens, you'll probably never put it back again. There'd be no need to. And as people get more savvy, as your boss becomes more savvy in whatever business you work in, he would start to pay you in tokens. So you would never even have to put the money back in. So while it might be an intermediary measure, 5, 10, 15 years, it's a way that the banks remain happy, we get to use their infrastructure, right? And the value gets taken out of the banks.
Right, so they understand and they're smart enough to realize that this is a way that they're getting their foot in the door rather than being left in the
Yeah, and they like the fact that they retain their core business, which is keeping the flow, and that they can provide credit services directly like they did in the old days, in the form of like lines of credit that are easily accessible at very, very low fees, 1% or under, and that those lines of credit are usable as if it was actual debit. So there's no 25-day wait period. In fact, people are so worried about the 25-day wait period, MasterCard just filed a patent on something having to do with eliminating the 25-day wait period.
Well, they know it's
November
not.
6th. We were published live, in the public domain in October. So, once the patent examiner gets our letter, say, please dismiss this patent because, you can see this is public work. We're trying to make this open source. We want the world to know about this. We want the world to work with us, right? So this is why anyone who wants to partner with us, who thinks they could offer something to the vision, don't be shy. Definitely email me. Mike will give you the details. It's just ken@nationpay.io. Any ideas you might have, even involving other ICOs, happy to talk to you.
You want to write
consult.
it there? Ken, write it on the board there.
Right here,
Marker.
Ken.
Yeah. There's marker.
Oh, on that side,
On that side.
Oh, okay, sure. I don't want to take away all of your manual work.
Okay.
In fact, Mike has an interesting proposal to talk about treating the email like a text by sending a number 1, 2, or 3. I'll tell you about that. I like that idea. Motivate people.
Okay, let's take one more and then we'll, just, Ken at what? Nationpay.co?
.io.
.io. Okay.
Yeah, I had a quick question just
Yeah.
about any competitors that you've seen. So is there anyone else trying to provide the same service in this kind of new market?
So it's also a good question. I believe the question was, is anyone else offering like similar or the same services? So people are getting close. Ripple, which is commonly used to say, hey, what about Ripple? Started with the same notion of how are we going to be able to transfer value between banks? They didn't care much about the customers at the time. It was more about cross-border transactions. And they solved that in a very complex way where they include the settlement layers, we call them, the intermediary banks. They include them in the mix and with their own currency called Ripple. Then they decided they would change their design a little bit and allow for gateways to enter, where gateways back currency in a way where the chain can be rippled across. Then they decided not to use that at all, and now they have 4 of their own applications, each one of them dealing with the settlement layer on some level. They're only slowly starting to see the light and come up with a solution where player A has their own token, player B has their own token. One token comes out, it gets transferred through a decentralized exchange, goes to its destination. The way they integrate it is very difficult. There's an API that's very difficult for that to happen. It's very new, and I wouldn't be surprised if they got some of those ideas from people like ourselves, for example, just by looking around at our own white papers, which is something we encouraged. I never discouraged that. I said, rather than patenting the technology, it was more important to be open source about everything, because that's the spirit of blockchain, and attract the right people to us to say, hey, you guys were in this first, and we'd love to be part of that, like part of something that we believe will be the most efficient banking platform that could ever be built, and ultimately we'll get all the money out of the banks and keep the banks happy, which is like an impossible thing to fathom, but it works. And so hopefully that answers your question. Stellar is another one that's close but different, and the way it's different has to do with the account management at the bank versus a copy of that account management structure that they need to have outside the bank. We don't need to have that at all. It's a very elegant system. Just using the existing accounting structure. Yes.
Just said that blockchain basically like people to work together.
I'm sorry?
Like, you had everything open for everybody, so everyone see your technology, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
There's only certain parts missing, but most of the concepts and the ideas are presented for everyone to see.
So why didn't you consider joining Global?
Why what?
Why haven't you considered joining Global?
Why don't you join Ripple?
Yeah, instead of like doing.
Why compete with these? Why not join? He's saying why not?
It's interesting. I've actually on LinkedIn, I'm connected to some of the top people, the top like 6 people at Ripple, and I've actually done that. I've said, hey, why don't you come work on our platform, or I'll be happy to work with yours. But it was, I think the attitude was more like,
Let's see who's
come
first.
work on our platform. But there might have been a little, we'll partner, we can do something. Most of the responses were, hey, you do know I work at Ripple, right? Like, they're not ready for that, and the more advanced they get along their own lines, the more corporate attitudes they get, and the more cohesive, and it's like, well, we're working on our own thing, and they try and save their own, what they're working on. But yeah, I'm definitely open to partnerships. I've spoken to Joe Lubin, who's the co-founder of Ethereum. I had a 1-hour meeting with him. He likes what we're doing. In both spaces, in the real estate space and in the banking space. But at the time I came to him with the banking, he was working on a bank-to-bank solution with Santander, actually. And the real estate solution, which he loved so much, 6 months later, the response is, after I'm so interested, it'll just be a matter of time before we get back to you to propose a partnership. It's now, well, how far along are you? We're working on something similar. Maybe if there's synergy, we can connect. So you never know. I mean, people who can be your best friend one day, sometimes
Right, it's
not.
such a wild, wild west, and think about this is such a this is one phenomenon that it's just not starting in the United States or starting in Europe, but it's really international, and so many different areas are doing it. One more, let's go on.
So what would you suggest as students that what we should do in terms of, just like any suggestion?
In terms of,
I guess Bitcoin or
Blockchain, basically.
yeah.
So what do
well,
you
I could
suggest?
spend, if I have the time, I could spend 20 minutes
Yeah,
answering
right.
it. I mean,
But-
that's a very good question, and that's where the whole world of blockchain becomes interesting to speak about. There's, in fact, Mike and I just spent some time speaking about connecting the dots with other players to get them together to form a partnership. We're doing a whole bunch of things right now. You could consider Bitcoin mining, but in a way that's not done currently, where you compound what comes back to you. And you do those numbers, you find that after 12 months there's quite a return. Of course, there's the risks that many more people start Bitcoin mining, but there's been those risks since the beginning. You can open up a Bitcoin ATM. These are some of the things we're doing now. There's reasons to do that most people don't consider, that allow what are called arbitrage opportunities. So you can buy and sell at the same time. You can get yourself heavily involved in an ICO or consult for an ICO. It's a well-known saying in Buddhism 101, that if you help others, you'll do better than anybody else. And that seems to be true. All these people helping people like make their own ICOs, a little frustrating. It's not your idea, but you're helping somebody else do their idea, are making the most money in this industry. They get 2 to 5% of the coin, and before they know it, they have 10 ICOs under their belt, and they own a portion of all these ICOs, more than the founder of any one of the ICOs, collectively. So you can do that. You can become a consultant. You can get yourself really educated, and you can do that. You can. I'm definitely going to answer your question too, but I just found that this is so important. It's like, and this is the basis of your class, this question. So I just think you should know all about this stuff. And I'd like to come back and I could talk about this same
Yeah, we
theme
can
again.
come back,
But because that's something I could talk about
And
for
we can
hours.
even host you
But-
online as well. A lot
Sure.
of times you can go, when you come back to,
Yeah, I'll
Miami,
come
you
back
know
like
where it
2 to 3
is.
weeks.
Yeah.
Excuse to
Yeah,
see my mom.
and if the students are interested, we can even do one that later on, we can, we have an extra room, you can invite others as well here to give a talk.
So anyway, short of that, you could read white papers, take the technologies you like, that you believe are good technologies, look for a good team, and so that they can get it to where it needs to be, and say, yeah, I'm going to put my money in that one, for example. Decentralized exchanges are good. Those are like no-brainers, right? But how long will they be good for? Until it's just saturated the market. right? You have to think about those things. Or you can just come up with your own idea yourself and try and put a good team together and say, yeah, I'd like to ICO this. I think there's a good reason for this to be in the blockchain world. You have to have a reason other than we just want to make money. You have to have a reason for the coin to be in an economy.
It has to really solve a problem. It's just not greed of, I'm going to get on the bandwagon. And let me just state here, let me just have Richard as well, since we wanted to end early. But those are things that you can even consider as your project. You know, it's taking that and saying, I'm going to define it, and you can even define a project in that aspect as well. You know, so.
Right.
So thank you very much, and can you stay around for a few minutes? But I just wanted you folks to see that it's such a burgeoning area, and we're really, I think, in the wild, wild west. That you think about it, most people aren't even aware, and everybody wants to get their foothold, and there's a lot of hype. It's almost hard to figure out. There's so much hype going on, and there's so much, the greediness here is where is it going to settle down, but you know that in my humble opinion, that this blockchain is a foundation that is really going to change. A lot of this is going to be fretted out, you know, some of the others that you can see. And as a matter of fact, what we're going to have is we're going to have one of the attorneys that is a alum as well, who's dealing now with people getting ripped off by all this, you know, Bitcoin currency. So he wants to come in. He was so excited because now he's doing a lot of litigation in terms of trying to get all these people that have invested, and they say, poor me, you know, what is the part that now I'm losing, and he's trying to do it.
Just I just want to leave you guys with this. You are students, and one of the things we're forgetting about this whole thing is that there are jobs available, right? If you're a programmer, if you're a CTO kind of person, if you're a guy that's like an architect, if you're a good marketer, right? And the jobs are paying a lot, right? Like I've been offered jobs at $250,000 for CTO positions of other companies, and I just don't have the time right now, and it's something that's really hard to turn away. But these are things that you should also consider. You can be a part of a team. You can join an organization like ours, for example. And you can also, don't be afraid to join an organization that will only pay you in coin and not give you a salary until they've reached their seed round mission. If you have like your mom to support you for like a year or two. Don't be afraid to be the entrepreneurial type, right? And if you believe in something enough, those are the people who do very well, the people who work out of the garage in something that they really believe in, rather than be like, oh, I have to get at least $20 an hour in order to do something for you. Like, most people are of that mindset. We're work for hire, and that's it. And if you can rise above that, then you can sometimes do great things. I did that with my first company. We spent 4 years without any salary. Before suddenly, then we raised money, and then I was able to get $160,000 a year, you know, which was pretty good at 22 years old. But just to keep that in mind, you know, it's to be practical too, right? We're not all just businessmen and, you know, coming up with great ideas and becoming the heads of our own companies. There's a lot to be said for the team. Nothing can be done without the team.
So Richard, you want to introduce yourself? And just, I met Richard as well, and one of the things is just his idea. I wanted to present his idea of, basically you almost can think of your idea. When you remember we talked about project, is almost in a way to think, I wanted him to talk about, he's on the very beginning stages of it to do. Okay?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just wanna.
I know
stream
it's
on. I don't know.
Okay. So Richard, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so my name is Dr. Richard Waite. I am a pharmacist, and I really do thank you because he took care of a lot of technical stuff that I was hoping I didn't have to go into, because I am a pharmacist. I'm not like a developer or anything like that. So it's great that he was able to cover all the bases in that sense. So I am a Miami native. I was raised here. I went to Sunset High School. Anybody? No? You guys know? There it is. Well, that's how we know each other. But anyone else? No? Down in Kendall? No? All right. Well, I went to Florida International University, got a degree in chemistry, and then I went to University of Florida and got my PharmD there. And I was involved on campus on a lot of things like that. I think there's a DeFi in here. I might have seen that. There we go. Might have seen a PyCap thing somewhere. So I was a PyCap actually at FIU. So got some solid connections there. And I'm a practicing pharmacist. I work for a very large community chain center right now, and been practicing for about 3 years now. I wanted to start off by telling you guys kind of how this kind of started with me. And there we go. In April of 2014, I had an experience at my pharmacy that I had a very nice patient, super high spirits. He had a lot of illnesses going on, specifically some mental illnesses. His name was also Richard. I don't know if that like played a role in this whole thing, but it's a very noble name. So, anyway, I processed a prescription for him. He had a very difficult time affording it at the time, and I don't know if it was like his spirits. I don't know if his name was Richard, what it was, but it like moved me that time, which is crazy because it happens all the time. This wasn't just one day in April that it happened. It happens all the time. And that night, I registered a domain name, and I had no idea. I knew I was gonna do something with it. I did not know what yet. I just knew I wanted to do something to help people pay for their medications. And that domain name was projectcopay.org. And it just connected with me probably about a month ago, learning about blockchain. There's a student just asked, what should you do as students? This is for everybody because this video might, who knows who's gonna see the video, but whether you're a student, whether you're 50 years old, whether you're well off into your career, whether you're a teenager about to start middle school, I think everybody should be learning the basics at a bare minimum of what blockchain technology is and how it's gonna disrupt everything. And I started doing that for myself and how it's gonna be applied to healthcare. So that's when it just really clicked that, okay, figure out a way to help people pay for the medications. You already got that domain name, let's get going. So what the basis of the idea is to create a tangible representation of healthcare dollars saved. So what do I mean by that? Being a pharmacist, I meet with people that involves preventative services. So if a patient has asthma, and I see that patient and I perform a specific service, there's a possibility that I could save that patient the following year an emergency room visit, which could be between $10,000 and $20,000 of healthcare costs. But if that happens, or if it doesn't happen, that money is not really seen. Like if that patient just avoided that emergency room visit because of my visit with them, that $20,000 is either going on to the balance sheet for the insurance company because they didn't pay that, or it's debt not taken on by that individual because they might have been paying out of pocket. So my thing was, well, hey, why don't we incentivize this? Why don't we tell the patient, hey, we'll give you a piece of that $20,000 if you just go do the service, right? And the same thing on the pharmacy side. Hey, pharmacist, we'll give you a piece of that also for providing that quality care to that patient. So what blockchain does, it creates the ability to form this currency and form this tangible asset that I think should be represented in some of those healthcare dollars spent. And I think if we can create an ecosystem around that, it could really create value and create incentives for both not only healthcare providers providing quality care, but patients actively seeking to do these things. Because we kind of think now, well, you're gonna be healthier, just do it. Go to the gym, go work out, right? But what we're seeing is it's just not enough right now. People are still becoming unhealthier. Healthcare dollars are still being increased and spent every year. So I'm just trying to do something that's gonna figure out a way to just start making change,
Can I answer?
Yeah, sure.
So in the United States, we're probably the least efficient country in the world for healthcare. So what they're trying to do in the United States is switch the model from fee to service versus fee to performance. So what the model is trying to do, for instance, instead of each hospital giving you more and more tests, if you have a patient, let's say, that has heart problems, what they'll do is the government will tell the hospital, we'll give you $100,000 and you treat that patient. If that patient comes back and forth to the hospital and it's gonna cost you $200,000 to treat that patient, you have to eat it. But hospital, if you're efficient with that patient and you can educate that patient and treat that patient better, then it only costs you $50,000, you can then pocket that additional $50,000. So it's in a way you're extending that, where the United States says they know it's not working well for this fee for service, that it's giving the incentive. Every time I see a patient, I'll just give you another test.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna give that patient, I'm gonna pay you by performance. It's almost like you're adding on to it, and you're now saying not only to the hospital, but you're saying to the patient, if I'm able to do better in my own health care, I should get a portion of it, and if you're like the pharmacist, you should get a portion, am I correct in
Yeah,
that?
so I appreciate you saying that because it's actually kind of a solid segue into the next slide. So basically wanted to create an ecosystem around some of these payment, around that token, right? And it's because of what she said. There's a lot of the doctors, like why am I doing this, right? Rising healthcare costs, which I spoke about, but she kind of came into the why. A lot of physicians' offices, because of that incentives and because they have a set amount, their volume is starting to increase, and they're trying to be efficient, and they're trying to provide care, and they're just getting overwhelmed, and they're not able to really take on that with the current resources that they have. And this is just a way to add in some sort of incentivized healthcare to, one, maybe have that doctor slow down a little bit, or maybe have the patient more bought into the time that's going to be there.
So who are you gonna be selling this to?
So that I'm definitely gonna get into.
Okay.
And I just wanna go through this, I promise you I'm gonna hit that.
Okay, so we have about, let's
Pharmacies.
do about 5 minutes, okay?
5 minutes.
Okay.
All right, let's try that. All right, let's do it. All right, so hurting business models. Pharmacies are hurting greatly in what is going on in terms of reimbursement rates and things like that. So there's just lack of incentives. There's someone that I know that works at Humana that had a huge undertaking that they had to go through for their incentivized healthcare program to get a $5 gift card to Target, right? So it's just becoming too difficult. So the competition, I call it the playing field. A lot of the healthcare companies now in blockchain are focused mainly on medical healthcare records. I think you guys have maybe heard of like patient touring and things like that. That is the main focus right now in healthcare. Howard, please get that. You got it? Is it important?
No, it's not.
Okay, no, I'm just kidding. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention something real quick. Some of you guys, if you guys have social media, if you can just go on there real quick and just talk about how there's some random pharmacist talking to you, and you're not really sure how it's gonna go, right? Post that real quick, and then later we'll post about like how you felt about it, because I know you guys are on Facebook, so you guys hook me up, I appreciate that. All right, so the challenges with the medical supply chain, the challenges with medical healthcare records are HIPAA, security, who's going to be the first to win, what hospitals, is it going to be like a universal platform, can everyone access it? So that's just a problem that is going to be a huge barrier to entry, whereas you're not going to really see that with this type of program, because my initial thing is that there's not going to be a lot of healthcare dollars saved, right? Thank you for all right, so why use blockchain? So the biggest thing about it that I want to mention for sakes of time is that there's a lot of benefits to using it as a transaction specifically for pharmacies, and for pharmacies to stay competitive, and especially independent pharmacies to stay competitive against larger pharmacies like CVS. And there's a lot of good benefits there that he kind of touched on in terms of like why use currency as like as a blockchain. So this is how I'm thinking that the tokens could get into supply chain. So you guys, we talked about the ICO and the possibility of that. I'm not in a race to get into an ICO. I'm not in a race to be in that loop, but that's a possibility. There's things called airdrops now where you can basically, if it's associated to a token and people already have that token, you could airdrop it, where if they have like 10 Ethereum, they can get 10, I call it Pico tokens, right? Where are we at here? So another way that it can be provided and entered out into the circulation is that it can be given to, on a yearly basis or some sort of schedule, it can be given to healthcare organizations like health insurance companies or physicians' practices. It can also be unlocked by products. So an incentive could be, if we know a patient's going to buy a yoga mat, that might be associated with some healthy habits and healthy behaviors. Maybe buying that yoga mat can unlock a token. So that's just another way of getting that token out into the ecosystem. So some of the incentives, right? So my thing is, I'm hoping to have incentives tied with tokens. What that token number is going to be for incentive, that's up to like the market to really decide. But I do think as a pharmacist, a lot of healthcare professionals are going to have to be developing these types of incentive programs, because it could be different per patient population, per disease state. The physicians might have their own, how many tokens they want to give out for someone that took care of their blood pressure for that month or whatever. But some of the examples include like gym check-ins. So if you're going to LA Fitness and you check into that gym 3 times a week, that might unlock a token for you. And it's just those little things that can possibly get the tokens into your account, into your possession, which then you could eventually, if the full ecosystem, which I didn't get to talk about initially, if you can get that full ecosystem built, and these tokens, the full loop around comes where you can then use these tokens to pay for your medications at the pharmacy. So that's where like the whole Project Copay thing comes in. That's like the end game that I saw too. You can use it for healthcare expenses, whether it's at the physician's office or whether it's at the pharmacy. So the app wallet, so app/wallet. If my thing with this is, if this gets built, this would be the potential hub that you can store and have like an account of tokens. So does anyone here know what like an HSA is, or like a health savings account? Emerson, come on, man.
I work in healthcare, can
I
I
know, I
know?
know. No, okay, so there's something called a health savings account, which when you get a job and you have an employer, you can put money tax-free into an account and you can use it only for healthcare expenses. So I'm thinking, well, maybe you can have that same kind of line of thinking with the Pico, and you can store these types of tokens in an account, and it could serve as your replacing possibly the HSA, where you can use it for payments at the pharmacy and things like that. You skip one again? I'm watching you.
No, because we're gonna have to leave at 8:30.
8:30, okay.
Okay.
So
So let's do this. Let's move
let's get
back.
questions.
Let's get questions.
Yes.
Where are you, and what is your challenges, and who do you have to hook up with?
So I am currently in a full idea mode right now.
Okay, so
I
these
just
are-
came up with this like a month ago, and I think I did a really good job at
You
speeding
did.
through this. I'm
You
gonna
did.
say.
I really
And
appreciate it, and I pressed you. too
no, it's
much.
okay. So I'm in full idea mode right now. There's all kinds of social media things about it. There's an Instagram. There's not an Instagram page yet. I'm on Instagram, but there is a Facebook page. There is a Twitter. If you want to join any of that, join in the conversation with me. I'm streaming live right now on my Instagram. You can find me at Richie Waith on Twitter, the Pharmacy Dude. I'd be happy to connect with anyone and talk more about this and get your ideas and feedback.
But I think it definitely is, so you're thinking about hooking up with insurance, hooking up with employers, or you're not quite sure?
Well, the initial phase would be to build a community of users first. So, you know, I'm not in a rush to try to pair with insurance companies. There's a possibility where if this fully gets scaled out, it could actually replace health insurance. Some of you guys are like, what? It's possible. I don't know.
So, and maybe I'm gonna, and then in terms of, and who's gonna be using it, the idea, a lot of.
So how
who's your
how do we
target-
replace?
No, who's your target audience gonna be?
So the target audience is going to be anyone that may now or think in the future that they'll need healthcare dollars. And the way that it will replace insurance is if everyone has accounts of this Pico in an Apple Wallet, and these people pull together and can share the risks and associated with certain costs, that's how you can potentially replace like health insurance in that sense. But essentially, it'd be anyone. Like right now, I'm a fairly healthy individual. I'm putting money away for a potential healthcare cost in the future, even though I have no like actual reasons to go to the pharmacy to get a medication or something like that. And other people with the HSA accounts have that belief as well. So
I would suggest checking out Rega.life.
I'm gonna check that out.
They're a multi-tiered, inverse tree, risk-sharing protocol specifically for insurance.
Okay.
It's a brilliant solution. I had come up with
It's
it.
for like health, like car insurance, those types of
Well,
insurances,
it's,
right?
to
Or is
tell
it
you the
health
truth, to
insurance?
get around all regulation, it's pet insurance right now.
Oh, nice.
The idea is,
Smart.
it proves the model, right? It's just a matter of time before it comes into the US. I'm trying to work with those guys, with a couple of family offices here to get them to do human trials,
Yeah.
on the East, but
I'd love to look at that.
it's a good platform. You might get something out of that. You might be able to do some things together collectively. I think there's the two don't overlap entirely. You could accept the copay, which is a good name, but you could actually accept the copay in your coin, for example, and that could have something to do with it as well.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Thank you very much.
And something like when you think about Amazon getting in the healthcare space,
Yeah.
you may wanna.
So I created a company called MedVise, which is basically a personal medication management company, which I think eventually might also be the future of what community pharmacists are going to look like. So if you guys are interested, is anyone here planning on being a healthcare professional in the future, like dentist, pharmacist, doctor, anything? No? Well, if you guys are interested in seeing how Amazon is going to be impacting pharmacy and things like that, you can follow me on social media. And, a lot of what I post, a lot of articles that I write are around how that's going to disrupt healthcare.
Okay. Thank you very much. You guys can stick around if students have other questions. My students know what to do. So I wanted just to give this out to you. Remember we were talking about projects? So then you can think about your project as well. Perfect. Yeah. Perfect.
Good job, bro. I want to be a student, I just want to stay here.
We gotta keep in touch, but I wanna look into that.
Yeah, sure.
That's a really good thing, I wanna look into. Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Just shut down, can you hear me? Yeah.